Welcome. So today we're tackling a really important topic, the anatomy of the eardrum and the middle ear cleft. We're going to start with a really focused, deep dive into the eardrum itself, the tympanic membrane, and connect its structure directly to what we see in the clinic every day. All right, let's get right into our clinical exploration. The tympanic membrane isn't just another piece of the ear. You could argue it's the single most critical structure we look at in otology. If you can understand this, you can diagnose a huge range of conditions. So why are we spending so much time on this one little membrane? Well, it's because it's doing way more than just one job. It's the barrier, sure, but it's also our main sound collector and our best, most direct window into what's happening in the middle ear. We're going to go from the surface view all the way down to its microscopic layers and then bring it all back to clinical practice. Okay, the very first thing you have to get is that the eardrum is not a single, uniform sheet of tissue. Nope, it's actually divided into two very distinct regions, and these two parts have totally different properties and, as you'll see, a world of difference in clinical importance.
Think of it like this. The eardrum has two very different personalities. The big part, the pars tensa, makes up most of it. It's strong, it's tense, it's the real workhorse for hearing. But then you've got this smaller, weaker section up top, called the pars flaccida, also known as Shrapnel's membrane. And this little area is where some major clinical problems begin.
So, to understand why these two areas are so different, we've got to look a little closer, kind of under the hood. The eardrum is basically what you could call an embryological sandwich, and the ingredients for this sandwich come from three completely different germ layers. And trust me, this layered structure is the key to everything.
Let's start with the outside layer. This is essentially skin. It's a direct continuation of the skin lining the ear canal, and it comes from the ectoderm. It has this really unique self-cleaning ability. But, and this is crucial, this is the exact layer where cholesteatoma, that destructive skin growth, gets its start.
Now for the middle layer, the lamina propria. This is the eardrum's powerhouse. It's the structural core, a beautifully organized mesh of collagen fibers that gives the pars tensa its strength, its tension, and all the precise acoustic properties it needs to transmit sound just right.
And finally, the inner layer, the stratum mucosum. This is a very thin mucous membrane that comes from the endoderm. The key thing to remember here is that it's continuous with the lining of the entire middle ear space. It creates this perfect, seamless connection.
Okay, so this brings us right back to the million-dollar question. We've said that the pars flaccida is the weak spot, but why? What is it about this specific area, Shrapnel's membrane, that makes it so clinically important and so vulnerable?
This is the question, right? Why does cholesteatoma almost always seem to start right here? Well, the answer is hiding in that three-layer structure we just talked about. Think about it, the outer skin, the middle fibrous core, and the inner mucosa. Which one of those critical components do you think the pars flaccida is missing?
And boom, there it is. This is the direct link between histology and pathology. The pars flaccida is completely missing that middle structural collagen layer. Without that fibrous core, the membrane is just loose and floppy. It makes it incredibly prone to getting sucked inward or retracting anytime there's negative pressure on the middle ear. This design flaw really allows for a dangerous sequence of events to get started. First, that negative pressure pulls the weak membrane in, creating a retraction. Then, that deepens into a pocket, which starts trapping skin cells from the outer layer. Because the ear's self-cleaning mechanism can't get in there, that skin debris, keratin, just keeps building up, eventually forming a cholesteatoma. And that's an expanding mass that can literally eat away at the tiny bones of the middle ear.
Okay, so now that we've gone deep into the microanatomy, let's pull back out and connect all of this to what we actually see during an otoscopic exam. You should think of these landmarks as reading a map of the middle ear's health.
The most obvious thing you'll see is the handle of the malleus, or the manubrium. It's that whitish streak you can't miss. And its position is a dead giveaway for what's happening behind the drum. If the eardrum's bulging from an infection, it'll look more pushed out and horizontal. If it's retracted from negative pressure, it'll look more vertical, almost foreshortened.
And next up is the cone of light. Now this is really important. This isn't an actual structure. It's just a reflection of your otoscope's light. Its presence and how sharp and clear it is an excellent sign of a normal, healthy eardrum and a well-aerated middle ear. Which means, if it's gone or distorted, that's a huge diagnostic clue. Look here, a bulging eardrum from an infection scatters the light, and the cone just vanishes. A retracted membrane will distort its shape. Fluid behind the drum, what we call glute ear, will make it look dull and dim. Every little change gives you an immediate clue about the pathology.
So, let's wrap this up. What are the absolute most important things you need to walk away with from this explainer on the tympanic membrane?
First, always remember that 3-layer embryological sandwich. Second, the big weakness of the pars flaccida is that missing middle fibrous layer, which makes it ground zero for cholesteatoma. And third, never underestimate the diagnostic power of the cone of light. It's a simple reflection that tells a really complex story.
And for our clinical pearl, if you found this breakdown helpful, please do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. We make these custom medical videos for you, and your support really helps. All right, with that solid foundation of the eardrum now locked in, we're ready to explore even deeper. Join us in the next segment as we actually move through the membrane to examine the ossicular chain and the rest of the middle ear cleft.
All right, let's continue our tour of the ear by exploring the middle ear cleft and ossicular chain. So, having seen the eardrum, we're now stepping right through that gateway. And let me tell you, we are about to enter one of the most complex, compact, and just absolutely critical spaces in the entire human body. It's a true marvel of biological engineering, and to really get it, to understand how it all works, we've got to know its layout. So, our first stop, the 6 walls of sound, a tour of the tympanic cavity. You know, if you really want to understand middle ear surgery, or any disease that happens in there, you have to understand its geography. And the best way to wrap your head around it, just think of it as a tiny little box with 6 distinct walls. So, let's take a tour. Okay, first things first, let's get a sense of scale here. This whole space, the tympanic cavity, is only about 1 to 2 cubic centimeters. I mean, we're talking about a space that's no bigger than a large pea. And yet, inside this tiny little air-filled box, a physical miracle happens. The absolute key to understanding all of this is to just keep visualizing that simple box: a roof, a floor, and 4 walls. All right, let's get our bearings. The lateral wall, that's the one on the outside. Well, that's just the eardrum we've already discussed. Easy enough. Now, facing it on the inside is the medial wall. This is the barrier to the inner ear, and it is crowded with critical landmarks. See that big bulge? That's the promontory. And what you're actually seeing is the first turn of the cochlea, the hearing organ itself, literally bulging right into the middle ear space. Okay, now let's look up at the roof and then at the back wall. The superior wall, or the tegmen as it's called, is often paper thin. I mean, seriously thin. And guess what's sitting right on top of it? The temporal lobe of your brain. This makes it crystal clear why a nasty middle ear infection can, in some really unlucky cases, turn into a brain infection. Then you've got the posterior wall. Think of this as the doorway to the mastoid air cells. It's a pathway for both air and, unfortunately, for infection to spread. Now, let's turn to the front of our little box. This is the anterior wall, sometimes called the carotid wall, and it is so important. Why? Well, for one, it's got the opening to the eustachian tube. That's what ventilates this whole space. But, and this is a big but, it's also the only thing, just a thin plate of bone, separating this air-filled room from one of the body's main highways for blood, the internal carotid artery. And this is why that location is so critical. Because in some people, that thin plate of bone, well, it's just not there. It's a condition we call dehiscence, and it means the carotid artery is sitting there directly exposed in the middle ear. Now, just imagine you're a surgeon. You look in, and you see a pulsating red mass behind the eardrum. If you don't realize that's an exposed carotid artery and you think, oh, I should biopsy that, the result could be absolutely catastrophic. All right, last wall, the floor of our box, the inferior wall. And just like with all the others, it's all about the neighbors. Right underneath this thin little shelf of bone is the jugular bulb. That's the very top of the massive internal jugular vein, the one that drains blood from your brain. So, yeah, once again, a hugely important blood vessel separated from the middle ear by just millimeters of bone. And you guessed it, just like the carotid wall, this floor can be incomplete. Sometimes you get what's called a high-riding jugular bulb, where it actually bulges up into the middle ear space. It might just look like a harmless bluish mass behind the eardrum. But again, picture this. A surgeon is doing a super routine procedure, a myringotomy, just making a tiny cut in the eardrum to drain some fluid, and they accidentally puncture the jugular vein. This is an absolutely critical anatomical variation you have to know about. All right, so now that we know the layout of the room, let's check out the incredible machinery that's actually inside it. The lever and its controls, also known as the ossicular chain and middle ear muscles. It's really just an elegant three-part system. First, you've got the malleus, the hammer, which is physically attached to the eardrum. When the eardrum moves, the hammer moves, and it hits the incus, or the anvil. The incus then acts as a bridge, moving the stapes, the stirrup, and the stapes acts like a tiny piston, plunging in and out of the fluid-filled inner ear. It's just a beautiful, direct mechanical linkage. But it's not just passing the signal along, it's actually an amplifying lever. It's a classic class 1 lever, in fact. Because the handle of the malleus is longer than the arm of the incus, the force gets increased by about 1.3 times. Think about using a long crowbar to lift a heavy rock. Same exact principle, just on a totally microscopic scale. And this right here is our first step of amplification. Now, this whole system also has its own controls. There are two incredibly tiny muscles that fine-tune its function, the tensor tympani and the stapedius. And check this out. They have totally different nerve supplies. The tensor tympani is innervated by the trigeminal nerve and the stapedius by the facial nerve. This is not random at all. It actually traces back to where they came from embryologically, and it gives neurologists some really critical clues when they're trying to diagnose nerve problems. And that stapedius muscle, which by the way is the smallest muscle in the entire body, provides a crucial protective mechanism. It's called the acoustic reflex. When a really loud sound hits one ear, the stapedius muscle in both ears contracts at the same time. It's a bilateral reflex. And what that does is stiffen the whole chain, which reduces how much of that potentially damaging, low-frequency sound energy gets through to the super delicate inner ear. Pretty clever, right? And hey, just a quick thought. If you're finding all this useful, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help us create more custom medical videos just for you. Okay, with that said, let's get to the why. Why does all this even exist? Okay, we've seen the anatomy, we've seen the parts. Now it's time for the payoff. Why is all of this incredible complexity necessary? Well, it all comes down to solving one single fundamental problem in physics. Let's talk about the impedance matching miracle. So let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever been swimming and tried to talk to someone who was underwater? Or maybe you were the one underwater? You know exactly what I'm talking about. The sound is all muffled, you can barely make anything out. That everyday experience, that is the absolute key to understanding the entire purpose of the middle ear. The problem has a name. It's called acoustic impedance mismatch. Basically, sound waves travel super easily through air. That's low impedance, low resistance. But when they hit a fluid, like water, it's high impedance, a lot of resistance. And what happens? Most of the sound energy just bounces right off. Well, guess what our inner ear is filled with? Fluid. So without some kind of solution to this problem, we'd barely be able to hear at all. So just how much energy are we talking about losing? A staggering 99.9%. That's not a typo. Almost all of the sound energy would just reflect away from our inner ear. To put that in perspective, that's the same as a 30 decibel hearing loss. That's literally the difference between being in a quiet library and trying to have a normal conversation. We'd miss out on so much. So how on earth does the middle ear solve this? Well, part one of the solution is the area ratio. Think of the eardrum as this big satellite dish. It's got a large surface area, about 55 square millimeters. It collects all that sound energy and then focuses it, concentrates it all down onto the tiny little footplate of the stapes, which is only about 3.2 square millimeters. It works like a hydraulic press, amplifying the pressure by about 17 times. And then we add part two of the solution, that lever action we just talked about. This provides another crucial little boost in force, multiplying it again by a factor of 1.3. So, here's the magic. You take that 17 times amplification from the area difference and you multiply it by the 1.3 times amplification from the lever action. The result? A total pressure gain of about 22 times. And when you do the math, that translates to about a 27 decibel gain, which almost perfectly cancels out the 30 decibels we would have lost. Isn't that incredible? So, to sum it all up, the middle ear is this perfect biological impedance matching device. It solves that massive air-to-food problem. It uses simple area and lever mechanics to create this huge pressure gain. What it does is achieve nearly 97% efficiency in sound transmission, which is just wow. It's an absolute masterpiece of biological engineering. It takes the gentle pressure of sound in the air and transforms it into a force strong enough to make waves in the fluid of our inner ear. Just a stunningly elegant solution. And that really leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? I mean, if evolution went to this much trouble with all this intricate physics and mechanics just to solve the problem of getting sound into the ear, Can you even imagine what kind of mechanical and computational marvels must be waiting for us inside the cochlea itself? We'll find out